Washington, District of Columbia, 10:26 in the morning. A Tuesday that began with the routine hum of federal bureaucracy has just transformed into a moment of historical rupture. If you want to understand how power actually shifts in the United States, not through speeches, but through the cold, hard machinery of the Senate, you need to watch what is happening right now on Capitol Hill. Before we dive into the internal warfare tearing through the American government, make sure you are positioned to follow this unfolding crisis. If you value deep dive analysis into the strategic maneuvers that shape our world, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is a developing institutional stress test, and you won't want to miss the next phase. Like this video to help others understand the gravity of this constitutional collision, and drop a comment below. Who do you think should hold the ultimate first move in foreign policy, the president or the Congress? Now, let the weight of this moment land properly. The digital voting board inside the United States Senate is usually a map of predictable partisan loyalty, green for yay, red for nay. But as the clock struck 10:26 a.m., the map fractured. The red lights didn't just represent the opposition party, they began to glow from within the president's own ranks. It was a visual confirmation of a political nightmare, a procedural strike. Lawmakers, led in part by the president's own committee chairs, have officially slammed the brakes on the Greenland Strategic Initiative. To the casual observer, it looked like a budget vote. To the architects of power in Washington, it was a declaration of war. Within minutes of the gavel falling, the conflict spilled out of the quiet mahogany chambers and into the marble hallways of the Capitol complex. This was no longer a debate about the merits of a land acquisition or a diplomatic partnership. It had evolved into an internal federal power confrontation. To understand why the atmosphere on Capitol Hill shifted so violently, you have to look at the trigger used by the Senate. They didn't pass a law to ban the Greenland Plan. That would take too long and face a certain veto. Instead, they utilized the most lethal tool in the legislative arsenal, budgetary restriction. The resolution passed this morning was narrow, precise, and devastating. It prohibits the federal government from using even a single dollar of federal funds for administrative preparation related to Greenland. No travel funds for negotiation teams, no salary allocations for policy analysts, no operational budget for logistical groundwork. By cutting off the oxygen of the initiative, the money, the Senate has effectively constructed a procedural wall around the White House. The plan is frozen in place before it ever reached a formal negotiation stage. This is the institutional rupture observers are now whispering about in the hallways of the West Wing. The response from the White House was instantaneous and unprecedented. Almost before the Senate clerks had finished recording the vote, the president issued a blistering statement. He didn't aim his fire at the opposition, he aimed it directly at his own party members. This move changed the tempo of the entire city. In the American system, a president traditionally negotiates with his coalition behind closed doors. By moving the fight into the open, the president has signaled that he views this not as a policy disagreement, but as an obstruction of executive authority. Under the U.S. Constitution, the president is the sole organ of the nation in its external relations. He initiates, he explores, he directs, but the Senate is now making a counterclaim. If a president's exploration involves the potential for massive future financial commitments, Congress has the right to kill the idea in the cradle. As the morning progressed, the details of the Greenland Plan itself began to fade into the background. In its place rose a much larger, more haunting question. Who actually controls the early stages of a strategic initiative? Inside the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, staffers are already pulling files. There is talk of emergency hearings. There is talk of subpoenas for White House documents. The system is no longer just watching the president. It is preparing to pull his strategy apart in public. We are now in a waiting period, a tense, high-stakes gap between the strike and the counterstrike. The executive branch holds the authority to lead, but the legislative branch holds the keys to the vault. When those two forces collide within the same political party, the old rules of Washington no longer apply. This is the start of a structural confrontation that could redefine the boundaries of federal power for decades. The Greenland Initiative was the spark, but the fire is now consuming the very machinery of the American government.
The shockwave of the 10:26 a.m. vote did not dissipate. It solidified. By mid-afternoon in Washington, the procedural strike had moved from the Senate floor into the narrow, high-pressure corridors of the West Wing and the soundproofed cloakrooms of the Capitol. Before we analyze the specific moves the president is making to regain control of his party, ensure you are locked into this investigation of federal power. Subscribe now to track the shifting alliances in real time and hit the like button to support this deep dive into the mechanics of institutional conflict. In the comments, I want to hear your perspective. When a president's own party blocks his path, is it a sign of a healthy democracy or a failing administration? Now, let us look at the moment the fracture became permanent. Inside the White House, the atmosphere has shifted from strategic planning to war room footing. The president did not retreat. Instead, he chose a path that many seasoned observers describe as high risk, direct confrontation. Under the American constitutional structure, a president usually relies on party discipline, the quiet, behind-the-scenes pressure used to keep lawmakers in line. But when several senior senators from his own party joined the procedural blockade, that discipline didn't just bend, it shattered. The Greenland Initiative is no longer a policy, it is a loyalty test. To understand the fracture, you have to look at the individuals who held the hammer. These were not junior lawmakers looking for a headline. These were institutionalists, men and women who have spent decades in the Senate and view themselves as the guardians of the legislative branch's authority. Their argument, whispered in the Senate cloakrooms and now shouted in press scrums, is grounded in the constitutional gray zone. They claim the president attempted to bypass the Senate's advice and consent role by framing the Greenland Plan as a mere administrative exploration. By using budget authority to stop him, they aren't just blocking a plan, they are reasserting the Senate's right to be in the room before the first handshake occurs on the global stage. But the White House sees it differently. To the president's inner circle, this is an institutional hijacking. They argue that if a president can't even think about a foreign policy strategy without a Senate vote, the executive branch is effectively paralyzed. This is the institutional rupture in its purest form. Two branches of government, controlled by the same party, unable to agree on where one's power ends and the other's begins. As the sun set over the Potomac, the conflict moved into its most dangerous phase, the attempt to buy back the defectors. In the quiet offices of the Capitol, senior administration officials began a series of high-stakes negotiations. The offers on the table were not about Greenland, they were about the raw currency of Washington, committee assignments, judicial appointments, and future funding for home state projects. Yet reports emerging from those meetings suggest a chilling reality for the White House. The rebel senators are not budging. Why? Because they have realized that in this specific moment, the Senate holds the leverage. By maintaining the funding wall, they have forced the president to come to them. This is the moment where the political system shifts from internal negotiation to open institutional tension. The president's public attacks on his own party members have backfired, creating a bunker mentality among the lawmakers. They are no longer just protecting the Senate, they are protecting themselves from a president they view as overreaching. The president is facing a reality that few of his predecessors have ever encountered. He has the constitutional authority to command the military and lead diplomacy, but he currently lacks the domestic political capital to fund a single plane ticket to the North Atlantic. The fracture inside has created a vacuum of leadership at the center of the federal government. Foreign allies are watching, adversaries are taking notes, and inside Washington, the question is no longer about Greenland. The question is whether the president can lead a party that has decided it no longer needs to follow. The machinery of government is still humming, but the gears are grinding against one another. The institutional stress test is reaching a breaking point. As the Senate prepares for the next session, a new threat is emerging. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is drafting a subpoena. What happens when the president's private files are demanded by his own party?
The cooling of the evening air in Washington brought no relief to the fever burning inside the federal power system. By the following morning, the procedural wall had transformed into something far more aggressive. Before we dissect the high-stakes drama of the committee room, ensure you are positioned for the next phase of this institutional collision. Subscribe to the channel to witness the rare moments where the machinery of government turns against itself, and hit the like button to signal that you value granular, strategic analysis over surface-level headlines. In the comments, I want your take.
Should a president have the right to keep foreign policy planning secret, or does the power of the purse give Congress the right to see every memo? Now, witness the moment the scrutiny became an interrogation. The Russell Senate Office Building, room 325. The air is thick with the scent of old paper and the quiet electricity of a looming confrontation. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has officially convened an emergency inquiry into the Greenland Strategic Initiative. This is no longer a theoretical debate about budget lines. This is an active institutional scrutiny. Under the American constitutional framework, Congress possesses the power of inquiry, an implied authority that allows lawmakers to investigate any matter upon which they can legislate. And because the Senate has already passed a resolution tied to the funding of the Greenland Plan, they now claim the absolute right to see the decision-making loop that created it. The escalation began with a single piece of paper, a subpoena. For the first time in this administration, a committee led by the president's own party has demanded the full strategic file on Greenland. They want the internal memos from the National Security Council. They want the private communications between the State Department and foreign intermediaries. They want to see the logistical groundwork that the White House claimed was merely exploratory. The White House response arrived within the hour, and it was a masterpiece of legal defiance. Invoking executive privilege, the administration's lawyers argued that the president requires a zone of confidentiality to develop foreign policy. Their position is straightforward. If every internal brainstorm is subject to a Senate subpoena, the executive branch cannot function. But here is where the institutional stress test reaches its most acute phase. The Senate committee chairman, a man who once stood on the convention stage nominating this president, stepped before the cameras and rejected the privilege claim. His argument: executive privilege is not a cloak for avoiding budgetary accountability. As the hearing began, the central actor wasn't the president, but the Secretary of State. Forced to sit at the witness table under oath, the secretary faced a barrage of questions that skipped past policy and went straight to the mechanics of authority. Under whose authorization were federal funds used to draft the preliminary Greenland prospectus? Was there a legal review of the Senate's budget authority before these administrative steps were taken? Does the administration recognize the binding nature of the resolution passed at 10:26 a.m. yesterday? The secretary's struggle to answer without violating executive privilege or appearing to defy the Senate created a visible, high-definition institutional rupture. Every "I cannot comment on internal deliberations" was met with a "then you are in defiance of this committee." The system is pulling the proposal apart in public, and the damage is not just to the Greenland Plan, it is to the operational boundaries of the presidency itself. By mid-afternoon, a new and more dangerous element emerged. A leak from within the administration provided the committee with a redacted memo suggesting that certain non-budgetary preparations, internal policy analysis, and strategic planning had continued after the Senate vote. This is the legal gray zone mentioned by scholars across the Capitol. If the White House continued to plan while the Senate had slammed the brakes, is that a legitimate exercise of executive authority or a direct violation of a binding budgetary resolution? The atmosphere on Capitol Hill has shifted from tension to a cold procedural fury. The Senate is no longer just asking questions, they are building a case. They are moving from a procedural block to a statutory lock, drafting new language that would make any further work on Greenland a criminal violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. The stalemate is now total, but inside the West Wing, a small group of advisors is suggesting a third path, a way to bypass the Senate entirely using a rare executive loophole. Will the president take the bait and trigger a full-blown constitutional crisis?
The confrontation has reached the stage that constitutional scholars call the point of no return. Inside the West Wing, the air is no longer just tense, it is clinical. The Senate's oversight escalation has effectively handcuffed the State Department, and the threat of the Anti-Deficiency Act hangs over every senior staffer like a legislative guillotine. But as the sun sets over a Washington that believes it has successfully cornered the president, a small group of legal architects is quietly drafting a response that could fundamentally redraw the map of federal power. Before we explore the third path that is currently being debated in the Oval Office, make sure you are locked into this high-stakes institutional test. Subscribe to the channel to see if the American system holds or breaks under this pressure, and hit the like button to support this analysis of the deep state mechanics few ever see. In the comments, if a president finds a loophole to bypass a congressional funding freeze, is he defending his office or subverting the law? Now, look closely at the strategy that is about to move this conflict from the committee room to the constitutional edge. The strategy emerging from the White House counsel's office is built on a single high-stakes premise: non-budgetary preparation. Under the American system, the Senate's power is tied to the power of the purse. If there is no spending, the Senate argues there is no initiative. But the president's advisors have identified a third path, a way to continue the Greenland Strategic Initiative without touching a single cent of restricted federal funds. They are looking at existing personnel authority and inherent executive function. The plan is as elegant as it is dangerous. The White House is preparing to argue that while Congress can stop the spending of money, it cannot stop the thinking of the executive branch. Path A, reassigning existing White House staff, whose salaries are already paid through general executive appropriations, to work exclusively on the strategic analysis of the Greenland concept. Path B, utilizing volunteer consultants and think tank partnerships to perform the logistical groundwork that the Senate has forbidden federal agencies from touching. Path C, directing the president's personal diplomatic envoys to conduct informal consultations that do not require official State Department travel budgets. By moving the initiative into this shadow procedure, the president is attempting to bypass the procedural wall entirely. It is a direct challenge to the Senate's belief that they control the first move. The White House position is hardening. The president has a constitutional mandate to explore national security priorities, and a budgetary resolution cannot strip him of his mind or his voice. But the third path has triggered a new crisis inside the administration. For the first time, the fraction isn't just between the president and the Senate, it is between the president and his own cabinet. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Treasury, both veterans of Washington's legal wars, are reportedly pushing back. They understand the structural reality that the president's younger advisors might be ignoring. If the executive branch is caught using creative accounting to bypass a binding Senate resolution, it doesn't just trigger a policy debate, it triggers articles of impeachment. Behind closed doors, the Treasury Secretary has reportedly warned that there is no such thing as a non-budgetary initiative in a digital age. Every email sent, every secure line used, and every hour of staff time carries a cost. The Senate is already monitoring the burn rate of White House offices. Any spike in activity related to Greenland will be viewed as a willful violation of federal law. The institutional stalemate. As the third path strategy begins to leak to the press, the temperature inside the system has spiked once again. The Senate leadership has already issued a preemptive warning. Any attempt to use workarounds will result in a total freeze of all pending executive appointments. This is where the situation moves from a procedural strike into an institutional stalemate. Neither side is backing down. The White House is defending the inherent authority of the presidency to think and plan. The Senate is defending the absolute authority of the legislature to control the nation's resources. The political and procedural options for both sides are narrowing. The White House can try to adjust the Greenland concept to fit the loophole, or they can choose total confrontation and dare the Senate to stop them. The president is sitting at his desk, a draft executive order in front of him. It doesn't mention funding, it doesn't mention Greenland. It simply asserts the president's right to organize the Executive Office for Strategic Foresight. It is a placeholder for a war that is about to become much more formal. The trap is set. The Senate is waiting for the president to sign that order. The moment he does, the institutional rupture becomes a constitutional crisis that will likely end in the Supreme Court. But there is one final move, a path of political compromise that could save both sides. Will they take it?
The federal power system has reached the final hour of the waiting period. In the American grain, moments of absolute institutional deadlock typically break in one of two ways: a quiet, pragmatic retreat into the shadows of compromise, or a thunderous collision that leaves the structural boundaries of the government permanently altered. As the lights remained on late into the night at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, the Greenland Initiative ceased to be a policy and became a ghost, a catalyst for a much larger question about the survival of a governing coalition. Before we reveal the final resolution of this institutional stress test, ensure you are part of our community tracking these tectonic shifts in power. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the next crisis, and hit the like button if you believe these deep dives into the machinery of government are essential for a true understanding of Washington. In the final comments of this series, who won? Did the Senate successfully defend its oversight, or did the president preserve the first move of the executive? Now, look at the closing moments of the confrontation. Inside the Oval Office, the third path executive order remained unsigned. The legal risk was too high, the cabinet fracture too deep. But the president did not surrender. Instead, the administration executed what several observers are calling a strategic adjustment. In a move that unfolded with clinical precision, the White House issued a formal policy reclassification. The Greenland Initiative was officially paused. In its place, the administration announced the creation of a North Atlantic Resource and Security Framework.
To the public, it looked like a name change. To the Senate, it was a tactical retreat that allowed the president to save face while technically adhering to the budgetary resolution. The Senate responded not with a victory lap, but with a procedural safeguard. Senate leadership agreed to allow informal policy analysis for this new framework, but only under a strict oversight memorandum. The terms, every briefing, every internal memo, and every conversation with foreign counterparts must be logged and shared with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee every 30 days. The cost, the president's zone of confidentiality, was officially breached. In exchange for the ability to keep the idea alive, the executive branch surrendered a portion of its traditional secrecy. This is the institutional settlement that has emerged from the rupture. It is a peace built on exhaustion rather than agreement. The Senate proved that the power of the purse can freeze the executive's imagination. The president proved that the executive can always find a new label for an old ambition. But as the dust settles over the Capitol complex, the real impact is structural. The operational boundaries of federal power have been redrawn. Future presidents will look at the Greenland crisis as a warning. Do not launch a strategic initiative until the Senate's rebel elements are neutralized. Future Senates will look at this as a blueprint. The budget is a weapon that can stop a president before the first official step is taken. The governing coalition remains intact, but the trust is gone. The machinery of the United States government has absorbed the pressure, but the cracks in the foundation are now visible to everyone. The Greenland Initiative may be frozen, but the war over who truly controls the early stages of American strategy has only just begun. This concludes our deep dive into the Greenland institutional rupture. The system held, but the rules have changed. Thank you for following this 5-chapter analysis of power, procedure, and the high-stakes world of Washington mechanics. If you found this breakdown insightful, please like the video and share it with anyone who wants to understand how the American government actually works behind the headlines. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigative series on the hidden gears of global strategy. Drop your final thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Until the next crisis, this is the analysis that lands properly. Stay sharp.